millionaire father, certain money could fix anything, meets a nurse by his comatose daughter. One sentence later, he can't breathe. Ethan Marks's footsteps echoed in the hospital hallway as if the floor were made of glass, each step slower than the last. He was wearing a dark suit, perfect as always, but his face showed the exhaustion of a man who had lost everything. His eyes, sunken and dull, seemed to be searching for a reason to go on, and that day, he decided to face what he had been avoiding for a month. The doors to the pediatric intensive care unit opened with a soft sound, and the smell of alcohol, mixed with a heavy silence, hit him like a cold knife. For a moment, he stood still, staring at the hallway lined with doors, with small glass windows, hearts drawn on them, children's names, toys hanging. But to him everything looked gray. He stood in front of the door with the sign, Camila Marks, 7 years old. His hand was shaking. His chest hurt as if the air were heavier. There, he closed his eyes for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and slowly pushed the door open. The light was soft. The machines flashed blue and green lights, each with a different sound. Beep, beep. A constant, almost cruel rhythm. In the middle of the room, so small in that big bed, was Camila, her delicate little face, her eyes closed, a peaceful expression that broke his heart. She looked asleep, but he knew it wasn't sleep. It was a coma, and she hadn't opened her eyes in 34 days. Ethan approached slowly, as if walking on broken glass. He didn't know where to put his hands, what to say, how to act. He looked at her as if he were seeing a miracle that hadn't ended. His eyes filled with tears, but he pressed his lips tightly together. He wasn't going to cry. Not in front of her. He whispered, "Hello, sweetheart." His voice broke. He tried again. "Daddy's here." But there was no answer, only the sound of the machines. He stood there for a few minutes, staring. He touched her hand gently, cold as the fear he felt. A chill ran through his body. He pulled up a chair and sat down slowly, as if asking permission. He didn't know how much time had passed. Maybe 5 minutes, perhaps a lifetime. But in that room, time seemed different, slower, crueler. He looked around, trying to find strength. He wanted to scream, to call Isabel, to say she couldn't take it anymore, that he didn't know what to do without her, that he wasn't strong enough to take care of his daughter like this. But nothing came out, only silence. He looked at Camila again, touched her face with his fingertips, as if asking her forgiveness for not having been there before. "I'm sorry, my girl." And then, unable to hold back any longer, he lowered his head and cried alone, in silence. A man who had had everything now had only memories. And there, in that cold room where time stood still, Ethan began, for the first time since the accident, to face the pain he had been avoiding, because seeing his daughter like this was like dying a little bit at a time. He tried to stay calm, but his eyes went straight to the wires, the tubes, the monitor that slowly marked Camila's heartbeat. He didn't understand the numbers, but he knew that it was fragile as the girl's almost invisible breath. He stood up suddenly. He needed air, a coffee, anything that would take him away from that anguish for a moment. He left the room without looking back. His shoulders slumped, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. In the hospital cafeteria, he ordered a black coffee, bitter like the days he had been living. He could hardly taste it when he took the first sip. His hands were still shaking. At the next table, 2 people were laughing quietly. That bothered him, not out of malice, but because he had forgotten what joy sounded like. He walked back down the hall in silence, the coffee almost untouched. And when he pushed the door open again, he stopped. He stood there, still, unable to breathe properly. There, kneeling beside Camila's bed, was a young woman in a simple white uniform, her hair tied back in a loose bun, small but steady hands, and a look full of affection. She held Camila's hand carefully, as if it were made of glass, and sang a lullaby very softly. The melody was simple, but full of soul. It seemed as if every word had love in it. "True love. Go to sleep, my child. The sun is setting." Her voice trembled a little, but she didn't stop. With one hand, she stroked the girl's hair, as a mother would. Ethan felt something in his throat, a lump, a tightness, a strange warmth in his chest. It was as if that woman had given him back a piece of his soul. that he thought was lost. For a moment he wanted to go in and talk, but he couldn't. He stood there at the door, watching. Camila, so still, looked calmer, her little face less tense. And the nurse. How could someone give so much without expecting anything in return? Ethan leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. The music continued. Time seemed to stand still. And there, in that quiet and special moment, he felt that he was no longer alone in his pain. Ethan remained leaning against the door, as if the floor had trapped his feet. He couldn't go in, but he couldn't leave either. Something in that scene had him paralyzed. And then, "Princess, when you wake up, do you want to go for a walk on the beach?" he asked in a low voice, carefully running his fingers through Camila's bangs. "That blue sea, where you can run barefoot, collect shells, and build a giant castle." He paused, looking at the girl's closed eyes as if waiting for an answer, and smiled. A trembling smile, full of nostalgia for someone who was still there but couldn't answer. "I think you like shells with stripes. When you wake up, let's go to the beach together. Just you and me. Pinky promise." "Yes." The nurse's eyes began to shine. Tiny tears formed in the corners. But she wasn't crying out of sadness. It was a quiet cry, from someone who loves without expecting anything in return, from someone who cares, even though she doesn't know if everything will turn out okay. "Your hair was a little messy today, but I fixed it, see? I put a barrette in it. You look beautiful." Ethan could barely breathe. That woman was there talking to his daughter as if she could hear her, as if she were just asleep and would wake up at any moment, as if her presence, her voice, her touch were more important than any medicine. He stared at the nurse's face and saw a tear run silently down her cheek, but she kept smiling. It was a mixture of strength and tenderness that he didn't know existed. "You know, Camila, sometimes when we close our eyes, our hearts can see better. And I feel like you're listening to me. I really feel it, and I'm going to keep talking to you. Yes, every day until you answer." She squeezed the girl's hand tighter and rested her forehead on hers for a few seconds, as if praying, as if giving everything. Ethan brought his hand to his face and wiped away a tear that had fallen without asking permission. There, in that small hospital room, surrounded by machines and silence, he saw something that money couldn't buy. A woman he didn't know, with no obligation, caring for his daughter with a love he had almost forgotten. A quiet, deep, present love. And for the first time in a long time, he felt hope. That night, Ethan returned home as if walking without knowing where he was going. The car felt quieter than ever. There was no music. The city lights passed by the window like ghosts. He drove automatically, his hands on the wheel and his gaze lost. The image of that nurse next to Camila wouldn't leave his head, nor her voice, nor the way she touched his daughter as if she were her own. When he entered his house, he was greeted by a silence that hurt. The door closed with a sharp click. The living room light was off, but he didn't turn it on. He walked slowly, dropping his coat on the couch. He walked down the dark hallway, where family portraits still hung on the walls. A photo of Isabel smiling, another of Camila, wearing a butterfly dress, twirling in the garden. He stopped. He stared at it. "You were so full of life," he whispered, as if she could hear him. He went straight to the bathroom, locked the door, leaned against the cold tiled wall, and there, finally, he collapsed. His breathing failed him, his chest hurt, and he fell to his knees on the cold floor. He covered his mouth with his hand, trying to hold back the tears, but he couldn't. It was a muffled, choked cry from a man who had endured too much for too long. The tears flowed, as if there were no end to them. He remembered the last day Camila was awake. She had drawn a picture for him, a heart with 3 people holding hands. "It's you, Mom, and me," she said with a toothless smile. He was in a hurry that day. He gave her a quick kiss on the forehead and left, saying, "Daddy loves you." It was true, but now it felt small, insignificant, too fragile in the face of guilt. "I should have stayed longer," he whispered. The image of the accident came back to his mind like a blow. The last fight with Isabel, the screams, the sound of brakes, the shattering glass, the smell of gasoline, and the silence afterward. That damn silence. He pounded the floor with his fist, but he didn't scream. He just cried more. alone like a lost child. There, in that cold bathroom, Ethan was not a millionaire businessman. He was not a powerful man. He was just a broken father, a widower trying to breathe, a man who would give all the money in the world to hear his daughter's laughter again, that free, happy laughter that now only lived in his memory. And for the first time, he let the pain out, without masks. Uncontrolled, just pain, longing. The next morning, Ethan woke up before sunrise. He couldn't sleep well, and to be honest, he didn't even try. His mind wouldn't stop racing. He could still hear that soft voice inside him, singing to his daughter. The way that woman looked at Camila had touched something deep inside him. For the first time in weeks, he felt like going back to the hospital. Not out of obligation, but because he needed to be close. He needed to see his daughter. He needed to understand what was happening to her. He arrived early, before the shift change, before the hustle and bustle. The hospital was still half empty, with dim lights and the smell of stale coffee in the hallways. He walked slowly to the ICU. His heart was beating faster. He didn't know what he was going to find, but something inside him told him he had to be there. He pushed the door open carefully, as if he didn't want to wake anyone, and stopped. Valeria was sitting next to the bed, not kneeling as she had been the day before, but with a calm expression on her face. She had a small brush in her hands and was gently combing Camila's brown hair. The movement was smooth, almost in slow motion, as if the moment were sacred. She had already set aside a little blue ribbon. Ethan stood still, just watching. Valeria didn't notice he was there. She continued to speak softly to the girl, as if guarding a precious secret. "Look how pretty you are today, my love," she said, smiling. "This little blue ribbon looks pretty on you. Blue, sweetheart. It matches your ribbon." Then she made a small bow and carefully placed it on top of Camila's head. Done. There. Now she was all dressed up, just like a princess. Ethan took a deep breath. His chest felt tight again. This unknown woman knew how to take care of his daughter in a way he had forgotten how to do. Or maybe he had never realized it. When she turned and saw him standing there, her eyes widened a little, but she didn't get up. She just smiled tenderly at him. A simple, welcoming smile. "Does she like blue?" she asked softly in a sweet voice. Ethan tried to speak, but couldn't. He just shook his head shyly, almost apologetically. It was true. Camila always asked for blue. A blue dress, a blue notebook. Even her toothbrush had to be blue. Isabel said it was because blue was the color of God, and Camila said that heaven was the freest place that existed, and that God lived there. Valeria looked back at the girl, lovingly fixing her fringe, and Ethan, standing there, realized something he didn't know how to name. It wasn't just care, it was more. It was love. Not the grand love you see in movies, but a simple, discreet, true love. A love that asks for nothing, that just gives itself. And in that silence between the two of them, without questions, without explanations, he understood that something inside him was beginning to change. Later, Ethan walked down the hospital corridor with firmer steps. He was still confused inside, but something pushed him to understand that nurse better, who seemed to know his daughter in such an intimate, sensitive, and unexpected way. It was unusual for him to notice details. He had always been a practical, straightforward man, but now, everything about Camila felt different, an urgency he couldn't explain. Arriving at the hospital director's office, he knocked softly on the door. A middle-aged woman with her hair elegantly pulled back and glasses perched on the tip of her nose greeted him with an attentive expression. "Mr. Marks, how can I help you?" He sat down without hesitation, but with some uncertainty. "I'd like to know about the nurse who is caring for my daughter, Valeria." The director adjusted her glasses, clasped her hands, and replied calmly, "Valeria Dawson, one of the most dedicated nurses we have here." Ethan looked down for a moment, then looked back at her. "She seems very involved. That's not unusual." The woman took a deep breath before speaking. "No, it's not common. But Valeria, she's different. When she learned about your daughter's situation, she asked to be in charge of caring for her. She said she didn't need overtime. She didn't need anything. She just wanted to be with the girl, to take care of her." Ethan frowned. "Even if she wasn't paid for it?" "Yes. She said she wanted to be there, that she wanted your daughter to feel accompanied. She said no child should go through this alone." Silence filled the office. Ethan stood still. Valeria wasn't family. She had no obligation, and yet she chose to stay. She took care of Camila as if she were her own, and her, "Does she do this often?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Often." The director smiled a little. "No, Mr. Marks, she's only done this once. With her daughter." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest, a strange warmth rising up his shoulders. He looked down thoughtfully and thanked her with a simple gesture. He left the office without saying another word, but inside, something was beginning to break, and something else was beginning to be born. He still didn't know what it was. He only knew that this woman was taking care of the most fragile part of him, and she was doing it with her heart. Ethan left the hospital director's office with his head spinning like a whirlwind. Her words still echoed inside him. She asked to take care of your daughter without overtime, without extra pay. That moved him deeply. He walked slowly down the hallway. The sound of his own footsteps was lost on the well-polished floor. He stopped in front of the ICU door, took a deep breath, and went in. There she was again, Valeria, sitting next to Camila, carefully adjusting the girl's blanket. She made no noise. She was in no hurry. It was as if everything about her had a different rhythm, calmer, more human, a care that came not only from her work, but from her heart. Ethan approached. Her eyes met his with a slight smile, as if she already knew he was coming back. He stood there a little uncomfortably until he plucked up his courage. "Can I ask you something?" Valeria nodded without stopping, stroking Camila's hair. "Why did you decide to take care of my daughter like this?" She paused for a moment, looked at Camila tenderly, and then turned to look at him without drama, without embellishment. "Ever since she arrived here, I've felt the urge to take care of her. I can't explain why. No one deserves to be alone, especially in a coma." The answer was so simple that it hurt, so true that Ethan didn't know what to say. He swallowed hard, looked away, trying not to get carried away by the emotion that rose like a lump in his throat. Valeria continued with the same calmness. "Sometimes people think that those who are asleep don't feel anything, but I believe they do, that they hear, that they notice. And if this girl is going to fight to come back, she needs to know that someone is here for her, that she hasn't been forgotten." Ethan pressed his lips together, trying to contain his emotion. Valeria didn't speak like someone who wanted to impress. She spoke like someone who simply felt, like someone who knew pain intimately. "I just thought she deserved to have someone here every day," she added in a quieter voice. He was silent for a few seconds, then whispered, "Thank you." She smiled again, a small but very sincere smile. Ethan stood there still, his body tense and his heart completely open. Valeria's words kept ringing in his mind like a song he couldn't get out of his head. No one deserves to be alone or in a coma. It had pierced his defenses like a silent arrow, but he still didn't know what to do with it. He wasn't a man accustomed to feeling so much, to showing what he felt, to letting anyone in. For years he had learned to control everything: emotions, routine, work, pain, always strong, always firm. And now, a woman he hardly knew, with few words and simple gestures, was stirring everything inside him like no one had ever done before. He wanted to say something, to truly thank her. He wanted to get closer, but pride, fear, confusion, everything was mixed up inside him. So he stayed as he knew how to be, serious, quiet, almost cold on the outside, even though inside he was breaking. Valeria didn't seem bothered. She continued to sit next to Camila, smoothing the blanket, arranging the girl's hair with an almost motherly calm. She didn't expect anything in return. She didn't expect a response, and that made Ethan feel even more uncomfortable. How could someone give so much without asking for anything in return? He crossed his arms as if trying to protect himself from what he was feeling. He observed every detail about her, the way she looked at Camila, how she smiled with her eyes, even though she was silent, how her presence made the room feel less cold. And he felt anger, but not towards her, but at himself. Anger at not knowing how to handle this, at having taken so long to return, at having left his daughter alone for days. While this unknown woman did for her what he should have done, his chest burned, but his face remained the same, as if frozen, because it was easier to hide behind his seriousness than to admit that something in him was breaking. that this woman was touching parts of him that he thought were dead. She didn't ask permission to enter his heart. She just entered with small gestures, with silence, with her presence. And that scared Ethan. So instead of speaking, he just nodded his head, almost imperceptibly, and took a step back. He pretended he had to leave, but the truth was that he needed time because being touched like that, without warning, without defense, is something no one teaches you to be ready for, right? Ethan arrived at the hospital once again, as he had been doing every day since he first saw Valeria next to Camila. Now his presence there was no longer cold or obligatory. It was silent, but constant. And that day, something different awaited him. The room was empty when he entered. Camila was sleeping as usual, eyes closed, face calm, chest rising slowly, but there was something on the dresser next to the bed. A worn blue notebook with the name Camila written on it in red pen, in a woman's handwriting. He hesitated. He looked around as if expecting to see Valeria there, but she wasn't. He picked up the notebook carefully, as if touching something very special. He sat down on the chair next to the bed, opened it to the first page, and what he found there made his heart stop for a moment. "Hello, my little warrior. Today the sky is cloudy, but here inside we make our own stories. Did you know that you taught me to love blue? Blue like your little bow, like your blanket, like the hope of seeing you open your eyes." Ethan swallowed hard and turned the page. "Today, I told you the story of the castle in the sea, the one I promised I would build, with colorful shells. Do you remember that I promised we would travel together? I'm just waiting for you to wake up." The pages were full of stories, of outpourings, of affection, some with drawings, others with little hearts. Drawn in the corners, Valeria wrote as if she were talking to someone alive, as if Camila could hear everything. Each sentence was a hug. He turned several pages until he stopped at one that hurt the most. The handwriting was more shaky. "Today, your dad came closer. He didn't talk much, but he stood there very quietly, looking at you as if he were afraid. Afraid of losing, or maybe afraid of feeling. I think he's trying to wake up too. You know? Sometimes his sleep seems deeper than yours." Ethan closed the notebook tightly and rested his head in his hand. His breath caught in his chest. It hurt, as if someone had written exactly what he was going through, and he hadn't even realized it. He tried to hold back, but the tears came silently, heavily. It was as if someone had opened a wound he had been hiding under many layers. Worst of all, she was right. He was asleep too, not on the outside, but on the inside. And for the first time, he realized that maybe it was time to wake up. After that day, Ethan never stopped going. Every morning, before any meetings, before any commitments, he would arrive. He would sit quietly next to his daughter, like someone trying to learn a new way of being present. He was no longer just a lost father. He was a man trying to come back, trying to feel, trying to understand what that pain and hope was that continued to grow even in the shadows. Camila remained silent, fragile, but with each visit she seemed more alive, even though she did not open her eyes. And he noticed that in the way the atmosphere changed when Valeria entered. She always arrived with a new handkerchief, a story to tell, a soft song on her lips, and with the same care as always. She talked to Camila as if they were having breakfast together. Ethan stayed there quietly, but attentively. Sometimes he smiled, a shy, almost hidden smile. When she laughed at something silly, he laughed too, but turned his face away. When she asked Camila questions, "What did you dream about today, princess?" He looked at his daughter as if he also wanted to hear the answer. They didn't talk much to each other, but there was something in the looks they exchanged, something that said, "I'm here too." It wasn't flirting, it wasn't romance, it was complicity. It was pain shared in silence. It was affection that builds over time, slowly, without haste, and without promises. One afternoon, Valeria came in with a small flower in her hand, cut from the hospital garden. She put it in a glass of water next to the bed and said, "Just to brighten up your day." Ethan, who was already there, looked at the flower, then at her, and murmured, "Blue." She always liked blue. Valeria just nodded with a slight smile and stood on the other side of the bed. The two of them stood there in silence, one on each side, looking at the girl. And at that moment, even though they weren't touching, even though they hardly said anything, it seemed as if the three of them were united by pain, by hope, by the love that was quietly blossoming. It was strange for Ethan. He had never felt this way before, so exposed, but at the same time so accompanied that even though he didn't fully understand it, he knew that being there every day wasn't just for Camila, it was for him too, because in that room, next to his daughter and that nurse, he was slowly beginning to recognize himself again. It was around 9 p.m. when Ethan decided to leave the ICU for a few minutes. Camila was calm, surrounded by that silence that no longer frightened him so much. He needed air, a moment to stretch his legs, take a deep breath, and let his thoughts settle in his head. He walked through the hospital corridors, now emptier, with slow, distracted steps, until he stopped in front of the small chapel room. The light there was dim, almost off, and what he saw made him stop immediately. Valeria was sitting on one of the benches with her back turned, hunched over, her face hidden in her hands. She was crying softly, her shoulders shaking, her body looking smaller, more fragile, as if the whole weight of the world were on her. She was not the strong, calm woman he knew beside Camila. There, at that moment, she was just human and hurt. Ethan didn't know if he should approach her. He stood there, watching silently. The muffled sound of her crying hurt more than any scream. It hit him hard, because seeing someone so strong break down, hidden from the world like that, was a pain he knew very well. He approached slowly without saying anything. He sat down on the bench next to her, respecting her space. For a few seconds, all that could be heard was her heavy breathing, until she spoke in a low, trembling voice. "I'm sorry. I didn't want anyone to see me like this." Ethan looked ahead, without pressing, without invading. "It's okay, Valeria. Sometimes we just need to fall down a little." She took a deep breath, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Then she looked at him, with eyes swollen from crying. "My brother Lucas." Her voice broke. "They just called me. He has leukemia. It's aggressive and he needs an urgent transplant." Ethan felt those words like a punch in the stomach. He didn't say anything right away, just lowered his head, searching for words that wouldn't sound empty. "I'm so sorry." Valeria nodded slowly, her gaze lost, full of fear. "He's only 25, and we have no one else. Just him and me. It's always been just the two of us." She took a deep breath, trying not to cry, but she couldn't. "I'm here taking care of so many people, trying to be strong." And now, he covered his face with his hands again. Ethan felt a strong urge to hug her, to tell her that everything was going to be okay, to offer her the world if necessary. But he remained silent, because sometimes the most important thing is just to be there. He reached out and gently placed his hand on hers. He said nothing else, just stood there, sharing the silence and the pain. And that night, in the solitude of the hospital, two broken worlds came together in a simple and true way, without promises. Just presence, just humanity. The silence was still between them when Ethan turned his face toward Valeria, his eyes filled with a new concern. He had seen suffering before, he had experienced loss, but what he felt now was different. It was helplessness. It was pain for others. "Valeria," his voice came out softly. "Carefully, I can help. If the problem is money, hospital, doctor, whatever, I can solve it. You don't have to go through this alone." She slowly raised her face, her eyes still wet, but now with a different gleam, a steady gleam. She took a deep breath before answering, and when she spoke, her voice did not tremble. "No, thank you, but no." Ethan frowned, not understanding. "Why? I'm not offering this out of pity. It's just that—" She paused. Even he didn't know how to finish the sentence. Valeria wiped her face with a handkerchief and looked at him sweetly, but also firmly. "Because I don't want to owe you anything, if it's out of pity." The silence between them grew heavier. She didn't say that with pain or anger. It was just the truth, a truth spoken from a pure heart. "I know what it's like to swallow your pride and ask for help. I've done it more times than I'd like, but not now. No, that's right. My brother needs me to be strong, and I need to be able to look at him with my head held high, and look at myself that way too." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. This woman had a dignity he hadn't seen in a long time. It was as if she were carrying the world on her shoulders and still refused to bend down. Valeria, it's not pity. It's admiration. It's gratitude. It's the least I can do for someone who cares for my daughter as if she were her own. She smiled, a tired but sincere smile. And that's exactly why I'm still here, because it's for her, not for you, not for money. He lowered his gaze, respected her, and in that moment understood that sometimes the greatest strength in the world is having the courage to say no, because what Valeria wanted, more than any help, was to keep intact what was hers, her dignity, her true love, and her pure heart. The morning seemed the same as the others. The sun timidly entered through the window of the intensive care room, the constant noise of the machines, and the silence that always surrounded Camila's bed. Ethan arrived early, as he did every day, and found Valeria already sitting there, carefully combing the girl's hair. He greeted her with a discreet gesture and approached, pulling the chair close to his daughter. He adjusted the blanket with his hands, looked at the girl's still face, and took a deep breath. He had learned to wait, to be patient, to trust in time. But deep down, every day was a struggle not to lose faith. Valeria got up, went to the small table, grabbed a little book of children's stories, and returned to the side of the bed. "Today, I brought the one about the magical jungle," she said softly, as if the girl could really hear her. "The one with the little blue bird that sings only for those with brave hearts." She opened the book and began to read in a calm, rhythmic voice, putting emotion into every sentence. Ethan looked at Camilla with eyes full of love and longing to see her. He took her little hand in his again, as he always did, and held it tenderly. It was a small, cold hand, as always. But then something different happened. Ethan felt a slight, very slight, squeeze. He stood still, staring at her hand. He stopped breathing for a moment. Valeria whispered, unable to believe what she was feeling. She immediately put down her book, looked at the girl's hand, and then she saw it too, the little fingers moving, just a little, but moving, as if they wanted to respond to her father's touch. Ethan looked at his daughter with wide eyes, his heart racing. "Camilla, my love. It's me, Daddy. It's me. Can you hear me?" He squeezed again, very slowly, and felt it again. Her fingers reacted. It wasn't a spasm. It was a response. It was life. It was presence. Valeria brought her hands to her mouth. Tears came immediately, uncontrollably. She cried like someone who sees a miracle before her eyes. Her shoulders shook, her face full of pure emotion. She felt it. She whispered with a broken voice, "She's here." Ethan was crying too, but differently than other times. It wasn't pain. It was hope. It was a reunion. "Camilla, my love, Daddy's here. I'm here with you, my girl." Valeria knelt beside the bed, grabbing the girl's other arm. "You're strong, little one. You're stronger than anyone here." The room, which had been so cold before, now seemed to have a different light, a different atmosphere. That small movement, that almost invisible reaction, was everything. It was like opening a window after months of darkness. And in that moment, they both knew. She wanted to come back. She was fighting. She was not alone. The room seemed to breathe with them. Ethan still held his daughter's hand, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Valeria knelt beside the bed, her face still wet with tears. They looked at each other, and in that look there was something greater than words. It was gratitude. It was emotion. It was the feeling that for a moment the world had stopped to allow this miracle to happen. Ethan slowly got up and without thinking opened his arms to Valeria. She hesitated for half a second, but went to him. She let him hug her. The hug was strong, silent, long. A hug filled with everything they were feeling there. It was as if they were saying, "We did it," without saying anything. He whispered close to her ear, "Thank you for not giving up on her." Valeria closed her eyes, moved, and replied softly, "She's the one who never gave up on us." The two remained there hugging, still not quite believing it. Camilla, although she did not open her eyes, seemed to be breathing more heavily. The hope inside that room was now alive, warm, beating. It was as if the girl had pulled them all back to life with that simple, small movement. But then the sound of a cell phone broke the moment. Valeria slowly moved away, took the device out of her robe pocket, looked at the screen, and her face changed instantly. She answered with a tense voice. "Hello, yes, it's me." Ethan saw her expression turn serious, her eyes widen, and her hand begin to shake. "What?" Her voice faltered. "But now?" She listened silently for a few seconds, then closed her eyes, swallowed, and replied, "I'm coming. I'm on my way." She hung up with trembling hands and stood still for a moment. Ethan approached her with concern. "Did something happen?" Valeria took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but her voice was already breaking. "It's Lucas, my brother. He got worse. They had to rush him to the hospital." Ethan felt a lump in his throat for her. He saw fear fill her face, which just a few minutes ago had been smiling with relief. Then she grabbed her bag, quickly fixed her hair, and looked at Camila one last time. "I have to go now." "Of course," he replied, almost in a whisper. "Go take care of him. We'll be fine here. Take it easy." Valeria nodded, her eyes filled with tears. Valeria already had her bag on her shoulder, her badge turned sideways, and her heart beating very fast. Her eyes were still red from crying earlier, but now they were filled with another concern. She walked quickly, but hesitantly. Ethan, standing in the doorway, watched everything with an anguish he didn't even know how to name. He felt like something was slipping through his fingers. And it wasn't just fear for her brother's health, it was something else. It was the feeling of losing a presence that, without realizing it, had become essential. He took 2 steps forward. His voice came out low, almost pleading. "Come back, please." Valeria stopped. She stood with her back to him for a second, feeling the weight of that request. She took a deep breath, then turned slowly. Her eyes met his with a mixture of affection and pain, a pain she couldn't hide, even though she tried to be strong. "Ethan," she said softly but firmly, "I really wish I could stay longer than you can imagine." He opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't. He just looked down, as if he were ashamed to ask. Valeria approached slowly, put her hand on his arm, and spoke tenderly. "But now she needs only you, and Lucas. He has no one else. Only me." The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan pressed his lips together and shook his head slowly. He knew she was right. He knew he couldn't stop her, but it hurt. "I'm not really leaving," she said, trying to smile. "I just need to take care of him, and you need to take care of her." He nodded, his gaze still broken. Valeria touched his face with her fingers for a brief moment, as if to say, "Everything will be okay," without saying anything. And then she left, her hurried footsteps echoing in the hallway. Ethan stood there still, his chest filled with a new emptiness. But even though it hurt, he knew that at that moment she was doing what she always did, loving in the most beautiful way, being where she was needed most. The intensive care room, which had once seemed like a refuge, now felt bigger, colder. The corner where she used to leave the little book, the glass with the blue flower, the notebook of letters, everything was still there, but lifeless, like a stage after a play has ended. He continued to go every day, as usual. He sat next to his daughter, held her hand gently, and spoke to her in a soft voice. But the sound of his own voice sounded strange, almost false. The calm that had been there when Valeria was there was gone. Camila, who had shown signs of improvement days before, was now back to the same state, silent and motionless. The rhythm of the monitor was the same, but Ethan felt that something had changed. It wasn't just physical. It was as if the soul of the room was on pause. He tried, reading bits and pieces from the notebook, repeating the stories he had heard Valeria tell. He even tried to sing one of the little songs, but his voice trembled. It lacked sweetness. It lacked faith, and that hurt him. One afternoon he arrived earlier than usual and stayed there holding his daughter's hand, looking at her as if searching for some sign. Any sign. "Daughter, I'm here. Yes, just like before, just like always. But it's hard without her." He closed his eyes for a moment, squeezing the girl's hand affectionately. "I thought I could handle everything on my own. I always thought so. But now I don't even know how to breathe without feeling that someone believes in you." Silence answered. A dense silence that seemed stronger every day. Camila quiet as a sleeping doll, and him more alone than ever. The doctors came by, did the tests, wrote down the same thing. No change, no improvement. Time seemed frozen, as if all the small progress she had shown had decided to wait for someone. And Ethan did what he could, but he knew deep down that it wasn't enough, because no matter how hard he tried, the void Valeria left was not only physical, it was emotional, it was spiritual. It was as if hope had also decided to rest, and now all that was left was silence. Once again, the days without Valeria seemed longer. The hope that had once felt light within the walls of the ICU now seemed stifled. He missed her not only for how she cared for Camila, but for how she looked, how she spoke, how she effortlessly filled the void. It was more than he wanted to admit, but it was true. So he went looking for her. He carefully asked for information at the hospital, made phone calls, asked questions, afraid of seeming nosy, until one rainy afternoon they told him where she was, at a public clinic across town where her brother had been admitted. He drove in silence, his heart tight. The traffic seemed slower, the world heavier. When he arrived, he went straight to the reception desk, and when he asked for her, the girl just pointed to the hallway of the hospitalization area. He walked slowly, looking at the tired faces, the strong smell of disinfectant, the cramped beds, and the lack of silence. At the end of the hallway, he saw her. Valeria was sitting next to a stretcher. Her brother, a thin, pale young man, was fast asleep, surrounded by tubes and IV bags. She had her head bowed, her hands clasped in her lap, her shoulders slumped. She was wearing the same white blouse she had on when she left the hospital, but now it was wrinkled, and she had deep circles under her eyes. Her hair was tied back hastily. She looked exhausted, but still whole. Ethan approached quietly and stood beside her. She sensed his presence and slowly raised her face. Her eyes, though red, still had that gleam of someone who doesn't give up. "Hi," he said softly. "I came to see how you are." Valeria tried to smile, but exhaustion weighed heavily on every part of her face. "I've had better days," she replied sincerely, "but he's stable, at least for now." Ethan looked at the boy, then back at her. "Are you taking care of yourself?" She let out a short, dry laugh. "I take care of him. That's enough." They were silent for a moment, a silence filled with things left unsaid, until he spoke carefully. "We miss you, Valeria. The room isn't the same without you." Valeria looked away, moved. "I miss her every day too, but he's all I have, Ethan. I can't leave him now." He nodded, and in that moment he saw again the strength that touched him so much in her. Even though she was tired, even though she was almost broken, she never stopped fighting for the one she loved, for the one she needed. Ethan slowly pulled up a chair and sat down next to Valeria. He didn't know where to start, or if he should speak, but something inside him told him it was time, that keeping it to himself for so long no longer made sense. He looked ahead, into the void, and took a deep breath. His hands were sweaty, his eyes tired. "I've never told anyone this." His voice came out low, hoarse, not even to myself. Valeria looked at him, but said nothing. She just waited with the same beautiful silence with which she always waited for Camila to respond. Ethan continued without looking at her. "The day of the accident, Isabel and I were fighting. It was raining, and Camila was in the back seat drawing quietly, as she always did when we argued." He paused. His throat tightened. "Isabel was tired. Tired of me, of my absence, of the way I was. She told me I lived more for work than for us. And she was right." Valeria listened in silence, her eyes attentive, full of compassion. "I remember the last thing she said to me. I still hear it in my head every day." He closed his eyes for a moment as if he were seeing the scene again. "You only appreciate things when you lose them." The words came out as a whisper, almost without a voice, and then silence. She couldn't speak anymore. Her eyes filled with tears. Her chest trembled. Valeria looked at him for a long time, didn't ask any questions, didn't judge him, just reached out and took his hand firmly, with strength, with truth. She didn't say, "It wasn't your fault." She didn't say, "Everything will be okay." She just held him, and in that touch, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Someone saw him, someone heard him, someone stayed. His pain was no longer his alone, it was shared pain, and at that moment, that was all he needed. Because sometimes the only thing that heals is someone who sits by your side and doesn't leave. The phone rang in the middle of the night. Ethan answered with his heart racing, as if his body already knew what was coming. The doctor's voice on the other end was serious, direct, blunt. "Your daughter took a turn for the worse. You need to come right away." His blood ran cold. He said nothing, just got up from his chair, grabbed his keys, and left the house, holding his breath. He got into the car as if the weight of the world were on his shoulders, and on the way, for the first time in many years, he gripped the steering wheel tightly, and his lips moved without thinking. "Please, please, God, don't take her too." His voice trembled, his eyes filled with tears. He didn't even know what he was saying. He didn't know if he still believed, but there, alone in that car, flying through the dark streets of Seattle, he could only repeat, "Listen to me. Just listen to me. Don't let her go this time." When he arrived at the hospital, he ran through the corridors he already knew, but which now seemed endless. When he entered the ICU, everything was different. Brighter lights, alarms ringing, doctors and nurses surrounding the bed. Camila was pale. Her small, fragile body barely moved with each attempt at resuscitation. Ethan stood at the door, unable to move. His legs were shaking. His heart was beating wildly, as if it were about to break. More than an hour passed, and he remained motionless in the same position. And then he saw Valeria. She was there. She had come back, wearing a gown, her hair tied back hastily, her eyes full of urgency. She was holding Camila's hand while saying almost soundless words, as if calling her back with her soul. When her eyes met Ethan's, she spoke in a trembling but firm voice. "She called me." Ethan didn't understand right away. "What?" Valeria squeezed the girl's hand and repeated, "I felt it, her name in my head, loud, like it only happens when it's real. I knew it. She called me." Tears fell from Ethan's eyes without him being able to stop them. He took a few steps to the bed, knelt down, and took his daughter's other hand. "I'm here, my love. Daddy is here. Stay with us. Don't let go now." Valeria stood there, like a rock in the middle of the storm, and in that moment, the two of them were no longer just a dad and a nurse. They were one heart, praying for the same life. The room was full of noise, but in the midst of it all, there was also faith. Faith born of fear, faith that screams inside, even if it has no voice. Faith of those who love more than they understand. Faith of those who refuse to accept defeat. The room seemed to breathe with them. Every second was a century. Every blink of the monitors was a wordless prayer. And then, after one last rapid beep, the sound returned to a normal, steady rhythm. Soft. The doctors slowly moved away. The alarms stopped. The silence that followed was no longer one of fear, but of awe. A sacred awe. The kind that no one fully understands, but that is felt deep in the bones. Ethan remained kneeling with his forehead pressed against his daughter's hand. Valeria, still standing next to the bed, couldn't stop looking at her little face. The girl's body, which had been tense before, was now calm. She was breathing softly, her chest rising and falling like a slight sigh. And then, as if time had stopped, Camila's eyes opened slowly at first, like someone waking up from a very long sleep. Her eyelids moved with difficulty, and her bright brown eyes appeared. She blinked once, then again. Valeria let out a sigh that turned into tears. She covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filled with emotion. Ethan jumped up, unable to believe what he was seeing. Camila whispered in a broken voice, "My love." But Camila didn't look at him. Still weak, her gaze a little lost, she slowly turned her head, and her eyes stopped on Valeria. She stayed like that for a few seconds, staring, as if trying to remember, to recognize, until her lips moved with effort. Mama. Valeria felt her legs give way. A sob escaped her uncontrollably. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. She took the girl's hand with all the care in the world and approached her, trying to hold back her emotions, trying to be strong, but it was impossible. "No, my love," she said with a trembling voice, caressing her little face. "I'm just Valeria, but I'm here. I'm here with you." Camila closed her eyes for a second as if resting. Then she looked at her again with a slight smile, as if she understood, as if she felt. Ethan cried silently beside her, saying nothing, just tears and gratitude for that look, for that innocent confusion that said so much, because deep down, he knew he would have to tell his daughter that her mother had gone to heaven. Valeria couldn't hold back. The tears fell without stopping, and she could barely see Camilla's little face. So alive, so present. The emotion squeezed her chest as if it were about to explode. She leaned over slowly, kissed the girl on the forehead with all the love she had saved up for so many days, and whispered, "My God, you came back. You came back." Ethan, standing next to her, his eyes red and his face wet, squeezed his daughter's hand tightly, as if he would never let go. He moved a little closer, knelt down next to them, and spoke softly, his voice breaking. "Camilla, my love, this is Valeria." He swallowed hard, trying not to cry. "But she was with you all these days. Every day she took care of you when your dad didn't know how." Valeria tried to smile, even though she had tears in her eyes, and nodded her head. "That's right, little one. I'm just a friend. Someone who loves you very much, even though I'm not part of your family." Camilla looked at them both with that half-asleep, half-wise look that only children have. Then she slowly turned her face toward Valeria and said in a weak but clear voice, "I know." Valeria opened her eyes wide in surprise. Camilla continued with that tired little smile, but full of certainty. "I listened to everything, your voice every day. She was the one who made me want to come back." Valeria put her hand to her mouth, unable to hold back her tears. Ethan lowered his head, filled with an emotion he didn't know how to handle. The three of them remained silent. A silence full of love, full of life, full of miracles. And in that moment, Valeria understood that even though she hadn't asked for it, even though she hadn't planned it, she was already part of that family, because her love had been heard, it had been felt. It was that invisible thread that held the girl between two worlds and didn't let her go. And Ethan saw with his own eyes that sometimes what saves someone is not a doctor, not money, not a movie miracle, but just a voice. A constant, loving voice that refuses to go away. The following days were filled with gratitude and care. The doctors confirmed what everyone already knew in their hearts. Camilla was coming back. It was a slow recovery, with small steps, but every movement, every gesture, every glance from the girl now had the value of a miracle. She had to relearn many things: how to talk, how to eat, even how to hold things. But she was alive and fighting with that same quiet courage she inherited from her mother and found in Valeria. Ethan no longer strayed from his daughter's side, but now his gaze was no longer one of pain, but of devotion, of present, attentive love and admiration for the woman who was there when he himself could not be. One quiet afternoon, after one of the routine checkups, Ethan called her over to talk in the hospital garden. The two of them sat on a wooden bench, with the sun shining softly through the leaves. The atmosphere was light, but her heart was full of emotion. Valeria began, bluntly, but with the most human tone she had ever heard from her. "When your brother recovers, I want you to come with us to the recovery home. I want you to be with us, to help with Camilla's recovery." She turned to look at him in surprise. Her gaze was somewhere between grateful and frightened. "Are you offering me a job?" He smiled, but it was a smile full of feeling, not out of obligation. "I'm inviting you to be part of our life. It's not just a job. It's because you're already part of all this. You brought my daughter back, and if you accept, I want you to stay close now that she's going to learn to live again." Valeria looked down, touched her hands thoughtfully, took a deep breath before answering. "Ethan, this is a lot for me. I come from such a simple place. It's another world. Your house, your way of life, your pace, your people. I don't know if I know how to live like that." He touched her arm gently. "No one is asking you to change who you are, just to continue being yourself." That changed everything for me and for her. She smiled shyly. Her heart said yes, but she still felt a weight. Not out of pride or fear, but because inside her, there was still that old voice saying, "You don't belong here." But then she remembered Camilla's gaze, and the certainty in the girl's voice when she said, "Your voice was what made me want to come back." Valeria looked into Ethan's eyes and, although hesitant, although afraid, she nodded. "Okay, I'll go." And in that moment, without realizing it, she took another step, a step that was not only physical, but emotional. It was accepting that even though she came from a simpler, harder world, the love she gave had a place there, and that place was now with them. The days passed more calmly in the recovery home. Camila, still fragile, improved a little more each day. Small words returned, her gestures were firmer, and smiles that had seemed lost before began to return. And around her were Valeria and Ethan. Their presence was no longer just care, it was true affection. It was closeness that came without forcing, without promising, but that was already growing within them. Valeria moved naturally around the house, cooking with Camila, reading to her, carefully organizing her medicines. Ethan looked at her, increasingly touched by her simple yet strong way of being. They began to talk more, to laugh at little things, to share silences that didn't bother them. His gaze, which had once been distant, now sought hers often, and hers, still shy, responded with that sparkle that only appears when the heart begins to trust. Camila felt it, she knew it, and she snuggled up with the two of them, with that peace that only children have when they feel true love. One afternoon, while they were going through the girl's old backpack, the same one that had been in the car on the day of the accident, Valeria found something she didn't expect. "Ethan, look at this," she said, holding up a crumpled envelope with her name written in a woman's handwriting. He approached slowly and recognized it instantly. "It's from Isabel." The air seemed to disappear for a moment. He took the envelope very carefully, as if it were made of glass. He sat down slowly, his eyes fixed on the letter, his hands trembling. He opened it calmly and took out the sheet inside. The letter was yellowed, folded in four, with marks from time and touch. He took a deep breath before starting to read. Valeria remained silent, sitting next to him, just listening. "Ethan, if you ever read this, it's because a part of our world has fallen apart, and I truly hope that Camila is okay, that she is surrounded by love, even if it's not mine. I know you are good, even if you shut yourself off, even if you walk away, but you're afraid to feel, and that's why you sometimes forget to live. If I'm no longer here, I hope you find someone who loves our daughter as if she were their own, who hugs her on good days and bad days, who talks to her even when she's asleep, who stays, and who lets you love again, because only those who have the courage to lose truly love. With love, Isabel." Ethan finished reading with a broken voice, his eyes filled with tears. He remained silent for a while, staring at the paper. Valeria, sitting next to him, said nothing, just put her hand on his shoulder, and that gesture said it all. The pain, the past, the present, and what they could still do. Ethan held the letter with both hands. The paper trembled, not because it was thin, but because of the emotions written there. So deep, so real, so impossible to ignore. Valeria, sitting next to him on the living room couch, waited. She said nothing, just looked at him with eyes already filled with tears, her heart tight with all she felt and all she couldn't say. Camila slept between them, wrapped in a light blue blanket, her head on Valeria's legs and her little feet touching Ethan's knee. Her breathing was calm, soft, and in that almost sacred silence, he looked at Isabel's letter again. He discreetly wiped his tears with the back of his hand and, his voice trembling, began to read aloud. "If someday I can't be with you anymore, I hope you find someone who will love our daughter as if she were their own." He paused. He took a deep breath, his throat tight, his heart beating like a drum without rhythm, without fear, without guilt. As he finished the sentence, his voice broke. The words floated in the room as if they had come from the sky, as if Isabel were there, talking to them. The silence that followed was louder than any sound. It was a silence of understanding, of forgiveness, of acceptance. Ethan looked at Valeria, and she was already crying. Her face turned away, trying to hide it, but unable to. He didn't hesitate. He went over and hugged her gently. A strong hug. A hug that said everything they had kept inside for so long. She rested her head on his shoulder, sobbing softly, and he cried too, not out of guilt, not out of sadness, but out of relief, out of letting go of the pain, out of a love they were cleansing with the blessing of the one who was no longer there. Between them, Camila slept peacefully, as if she knew, as if she felt it, as if, even with her eyes closed, she understood that now she had two hearts beating for her, two arms that cared for her, two worlds that had come together. Because when love is real, it always finds a way to return, even if it is in silence, even if it arrives in a letter, even if it is late. The next morning, after a night in which the three of them slept together on the living room couch, Camila in the middle, protected between the two of them, Ethan woke up with a different feeling, a beautiful silence, a full silence. The girl was still sleeping, breathing quietly. Valeria was making coffee in the kitchen, wearing simple pajamas and a messy bun on top of her head. And he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. After coffee, they sat in the courtyard where the sun gently hit the leaves. Camila was with the physical therapist doing exercises. It was the right moment. Ethan had a folder in his hands. He had spent the night thinking, reviewing accounts, papers, sketching ideas. When Valeria sat down next to him, he took a deep breath, looked at her, and got straight to the point. "I want to do something, something big, something that will change other lives the way ours was changed." She frowned a little. Curious, she asked, "What are you thinking?" He opened the folder and showed her graphic sketches, an idea that was already taking shape, a foundation, a care center for children in a coma with everything that public hospitals don't have: psychologists, music, love, real companionship. Everything you did for Camila, I want other children to have, too. She was silent for a few seconds, looking at everything calmly, processing. "And you want me to run it, to be the heart of it all, because no one else does what you do, because you feel, because you love without measure." Valeria felt her heart beat faster. It was more than an invitation. It was a calling, a purpose. But she took a deep breath before responding. Her eyes sought his carefully. "Ethan, this is beautiful. And yes, I want to be a part of it. I really do, but on one condition." He looked at her, attentively. "If we're going to do this, you, me, and Camila, I want it to be out of love, not out of gratitude or necessity. I don't want you to think you owe me anything, and I don't want to depend on what you can give me. I want freedom. I want truth." He took a while to respond. He swallowed, he thought. Then he nodded with a slight smile. "Then so be it. Free love, clean love, no debts, no pity, just love, as it should be." Valeria smiled, a smile full of soul, full of life. And in that moment, between silent promises and dreams, born of a place of pain and healing, they both understood that they were building something that went far beyond the three of them. It was about giving back to the world everything they had almost lost one day. The foundation started small, with a simple little room, a few well-kept beds, and a team that felt more like a family. But what it had was not structure, it was soul. It was made up of stories like Camila's, of people like Valeria, of a man like Ethan, who decided to transform pain into action, sadness into companionship, loss into love. Within a few months, children began to arrive, some quiet, others with a lost look in their eyes, all with a fragile thread of hope hanging from their hearts. And there, in that place, which did not seem like a hospital, but rather a refuge, they were welcomed with music, with affection, with words, with someone by their side every day, as Valeria once was. Camila went almost every day. Little by little, she left the wheelchair behind, first the walkers. Then, with the help of the physical therapists and a lot of strength of her own, she walked again on her own, taking small steps, fearfully but determinedly. One day, walking down the hallway of the foundation, hugging a teddy bear to her chest, she saw Valeria from afar, sitting in a circle with other children telling a story. She stopped right there, stared, waited for the story to end, and when Valeria turned and saw her, Camila smiled broadly. She ran toward her, stumbling a little, but with determination, and without thinking, without asking, she threw herself into her arm, hugged her tightly, and said with all the tenderness in the world, "Mommy, it's okay." Valeria froze for a second, then closed her eyes, held her tightly in her arms and cried. She cried silently, in a way that only those who have healed their hearts can understand. Because that mommy didn't erase the past. It completed it. It acknowledged it. It gave a name to the love that was born without labels, without papers, without blood. But truly, Ethan, who watched from afar with his hands in his pockets and teary eyes, smiled, because in that moment, he understood that love had won, and that his daughter, who one day almost left, was now walking, laughing, living, alongside the one who never stopped believing she would return. And in that embrace between two healed souls, a certainty was also born. The foundation could grow as many times as necessary, but what kept it going was that word spoken with a full heart. Mommy, okay. A month after the foundation's inauguration, on a random afternoon, Valeria's phone rang with a familiar number. It was the clinic where Lucas was still undergoing treatment. She answered with a heavy heart, as always. But this time, the doctor's voice on the other end sounded different. "It sounds good, Valeria. We found a compatible donor." She froze. It took a moment for the words to sink in. The world around her fell silent for a few seconds. Then the tears came without warning, silent and hot. Ethan appeared at the door and saw her with the phone in her hand. Trembling, she just whispered, "He has a chance." Ethan didn't ask any questions. He just went to her and hugged her. It was a calm, strong hug, full of presence. When she looked into his eyes, there was no longer any pride or distance. "I need you with me," she said, and he replied without hesitation, "I'm already here." 2 days later, they were at the hospital. Lucas was lying down, ready to go into surgery, his eyes tired, his body weak, but his smile still there. Just as he had always smiled at his sister since childhood, Valeria stood by the bed, squeezing his hand tightly, her eyes filled with tears, but without despair, only faith. Lucas looked at her jokingly, though without strength. "Are you nervous, Dr. Dawson?" She laughed with a lump in her throat. "I'm trying to be strong, like you always tried to be." Then he squeezed her hand slowly, looked at her intently, and said in a low voice, "You were always my sister, and my mom." Valeria couldn't answer. She just closed her eyes and a single tear slowly rolled down her cheek. She turned discreetly, went out into the empty hallway, knelt silently, and gave thanks. She gave thanks without words, with a full heart. It was the first time in a long time that she felt that heaven was listening to her, and that hope was finally coming home. The surgery lasted hours. Valeria sat in the hallway the whole time with her hands clasped and her gaze lost, as if praying, even though she didn't know the words. Ethan was by her side the whole time in silence, offering only what matters most in those moments, being present. When the doctor finally came out of the operating room with a calm expression on his face, she understood without him saying a word. The surgery had been a success. Valeria put her hand to her chest and took a deep breath, like someone coming back to life after a long time underwater. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of pain. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and victory. Days later, she entered the room where Lucas was recovering. He was still pale, his voice soft, but his smile was the same one she had known since she was a child, when he fell off his bike and said, "It didn't hurt." She approached slowly, took his hand, and sat down next to the bed. "You're back," she whispered excitedly. Lucas squeezed her hand gently, and although it was difficult for him, spoke firmly. "Now it's your turn to live. Do what your heart tells you. You deserve to be happy." Valeria closed her eyes. That sentence was more than a wish. It was a gift, a closure, as if he were giving her back something she had lost long ago. Permission to be happy. They hugged in silence, without promises, without haste, just love. A love that endured pain, fear, doubt. It was the end of a cycle that hurt more than she showed, and the beginning of a freedom she never allowed herself to live. When she returned to the recovery home, her body tired, but her soul light, she encountered a scene that almost made her cry. Camila was at the door, smiling with a bouquet made of colorful paper flowers. Her little hands were still clumsy, but the affection was perfect. "For you, Mommy, okay?" she said with a bright smile. Valeria immediately knelt down, hugged her tightly, and held her in her arms. Ethan, standing a little further back, just watched and smiled. a smile full of meaning. She looked at him, he looked at her, and no words were necessary. The three of them were there, complete, alive, ready to live what life still had to offer them, together. The months passed as if learning to walk again, step by step, with patience and love. Camila, once fragile and dependent, now ran through the Foundation's garden with her little cane moving alongside her, almost as an afterthought. She used it more for safety than necessity. She laughed loudly, ran after butterflies, and called the other patients by name. Everyone knew her as the miracle girl, but what few knew was that the real miracle was in her heart. The routine of the house was no longer about adaptation, but about belonging. Valeria and Ethan shared everything: the day, the care, the silence of the night. He made coffee in the morning, just the way she liked it, strong and without sugar. She sang while she cooked, simple melodies she learned from Camila or remembered from her childhood. Sometimes they would look at each other in the middle of the day, between tasks, and they didn't need to say anything. Everything was there, in the way he arranged the blanket on the couch for her, in how she put his tie away in the right drawer. They were small gestures, but they said a lot. They no longer slept under the same roof just to take care of Camila. Now it was routine. It was home. The girl went from one arm to the other with the same confidence. She called them both when she had a nice dream, or when something scared her. They were always there. One afternoon, Camila sat on Valeria's lap and asked quietly, "Mommy Val, why didn't you ever leave?" Valeria looked at her. Then she looked at Ethan, who was listening in the background, and replied with a smile full of truth, "Because this is where my heart lives now." And Ethan just nodded, because even though they never promised each other anything, without rings or formalities, they were already a complete, true family, united by the love that was born in the midst of pain and decided to stay. It was a simple Sunday, one of those without haste or noise. The rain fell softly, effortlessly, hitting the roof with a beautiful sound, almost like a song. The three of them were sitting on the terrace of the house, covered with a light blanket, and that beautiful silence that only exists between people who truly love each other. Camila slept reclining on Valeria's lap, her curls damp from the rain breeze, and breathing slowly and calmly. Her little cane lay forgotten to one side. She was perhaps dreaming of something beautiful, because she smiled from time to time. Valeria stroked her hair slowly with endless affection. Ethan looked on calmly, his eyes those of someone who no longer carries a weight on his shoulders, but peace in his heart. He turned slowly, looked at Valeria as if seeing her for the first time, and without rehearsing, without thinking much, said, "It's funny, I never asked you to stay, and you never told me you wanted to." Valeria smiled, still looking at Camila, without turning her face, and replied in a low, calm voice, "It's just that when you belong, you don't have to ask." Ethan felt that phrase deep in his chest. It was more than beautiful. It was true. It was the answer to everything he had been trying to understand for months. They belonged together, not out of obligation or necessity, but by choice, out of a love that is born quietly, grows slowly, and stays, even if no one calls it. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside, under that terrace, everything was in its place. A man who learned to love again, a woman who finally felt at home, and a girl who would never have to feel alone again. It was just another Sunday, but for them it was everything. A year and 2 months had passed since Camila opened her eyes in that intensive care unit, and since then everything had changed, not suddenly, but like the earth that is prepared, watered, and cared for until it blooms. Ethan knew that neither he nor Valeria needed any more proof. They already lived as a family. They already chose each other every day. But inside him, there was a simple desire to say, with a clear gesture, that their love deserved a marked beginning. That Sunday afternoon, he invited her on a different kind of outing. He took the car, brought Camila along with them, who laughed happily in the back seat, and parked near an old square. It wasn't just any square. It was where Isabel liked to read. On quiet Sundays, before everything changed, the place was empty, calm, with the trees swaying gently in the wind. Valeria looked around and felt a lump in her throat. as if she understood the weight and value of that place. Ethan took her hand and led her to a wooden bench under a tree. Camila stayed a little behind, watching with attentive eyes, like someone who understands more than meets the eye. Then he took a deep breath, reached into his coat pocket, and took out a small boxer. He knelt there on the still damp grass, not out of protocol, not out of tradition, but because he needed to show with his whole body that he was giving everything, without fear, without barriers, with an open heart. Valeria put her hand to her mouth in surprise. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. Ethan opened the box and said in a low but firm voice, "It's not because we need it, it's because I want to. Because life has already taught me that loving calmly is what makes sense, and I want to live that with you in our own way." Before she could respond, Camila came running up with a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. She gave it to Valeria with a laugh and said, "I guessed it, Mommy." "Okay." The paper, written in shaky letters, said, "Yes." Valeria couldn't hold back. Tears slowly rolled down her cheeks. She looked down, smiled through her tears, and simply said, "I accept, but only if it's our way." Simply, truthfully. Ethan nodded excitedly, and there, between the past and the present, under the gentle breeze of that square full of memories, they sealed what they were already living. A love that didn't come to impress, it came to stay. The day dawned calm, with clear skies and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves in the foundation's garden. Everything was simple, beautiful, just as it should be. A few white chairs, an arch of delicate flowers, and loved ones sitting quietly with hearts full. There was no luxury or excess, just love, pure love, without exaggeration, the kind that grows slowly and stays. Ethan adjusted his tie with trembling fingers. It wasn't nerves, it was real emotion, the kind that comes when life gives you a second chance and you know you're not going to waste it. Valeria, on the other side of the house, took a deep breath. The dress was light, almost without shine, with a fabric that moved with her body. She was beautiful, not because of the dress, but because she finally had a peace in her eyes that only someone who has lost and found again can have. The guests stood up when they heard the first footsteps, and there she came. Camila wore a little white dress with a blue ribbon at the waist, a small pillow with the rings in her arms, and her cane in her hands, which now looked more like a magic wand. She walked slowly, carefully, but with her head held high. The smile on her face was that of someone who knows they are part of something big. When she reached the altar, she stood between them, looked at each of them, and said softly in the sweetest voice in the world, "You're going to promise to stay together forever, right?" Valeria laughed with tears in her eyes, and Ethan bent down to kiss his daughter's forehead. "We promise, my love, for you, for us." The person conducting the ceremony spoke little. He said that true love cannot be explained, only lived. And at that moment, as the rings slid onto their fingers, as their eyes met, filled with everything they had been through together, they understood. They weren't starting something new, they were just confirming what already existed. Camila clapped her little hands, still holding her cane, and in that gesture, in that image, it was all there. A family born of pain, which had overcome the impossible and reached the other side. Complete, real, hand in hand, without luxury, only love. The sun was beginning to set in the sky, painting the end of the afternoon with a soft, golden hue. The ceremony was over, but no one was in a hurry to leave. Camila ran with still timid steps among the flowers in the garden, holding her little cane proudly, as if it were a trophy. The guests spoke in low voices, some still emotional, and there, a little apart, Ethan and Valeria sat on a wooden bench, side by side, holding hands. He was silent, his eyes moist. He was looking straight ahead, but it was as if he were seeing everything at once. The past, the present, and everything that was yet to come. Valeria looked at him from the side, respecting his silence, but feeling every beat of what was to come. Ethan let out a long sigh and then turned his face toward her, his eyes already filled with tears that he made no attempt to hide. "You know," he began, his voice breaking, "when Isabel left, I thought it was all over, that nothing else would make sense. I went into that hospital every day, just out of obligation, soulless, without hope. Valeria gently squeezed his hand, and then you appeared without asking for space, without promising anything, just sitting there singing, loving my daughter as if she were your own. He paused. The tears now fell slowly, not from pain, but out of gratitude, out of a beautiful nostalgia. And today, seeing you two, I understand what happened. His voice trembled, but he continued. I lost Isabel, but God gave me two back, my daughter and you. Valeria said nothing. She just cried too, not out of surprise because she felt the same way, but because hearing that out loud, with such truth, was more than she could imagine. She rested her head on his shoulder, and there they remained in silence with their hearts full, because some losses cannot be erased, but with love they can blossom again. And on that bench, with the golden light touching them both, they blossomed together. Now tell me, what would you do in Valeria's place? Would you have the same courage to love without guarantees? Or in Ethan's place, would you have been able to open your heart again after so much pain? Leave me a comment here about what this story awakened in you. I'll read everything with affection, because every opinion helps to share even more the feeling we experience here. And don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. There are many beautiful stories coming, stories that touch the soul, and look, click now on the video here on the screen. It's one of the most exciting stories that has ever been on this channel. It made many people cry and think about what really matters in life. You have to see it.